So anyway, I posted the notes in the chat. Feel free to add your name, and from my end, feel free to put anything in the agenda. I don't really have anything for personally. On my end, I haven't put anything in there just because I've been super busy with KubeCon and a couple of the other conferences and whatnot that are coming up.
Might be a good idea if you're going to be there. I'd like to meet up with you in person if possible.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, that was probably going to be the one thing I wanted to add on to the agenda, because I have a feeling we're going to probably cancel next Friday since people are going to start flying out. People are going to be probably really busy. So most likely cancel next Friday. And the one thing on the agenda from my end is who's going to be a KubeCon.
I'll be there.
Cool. And so
I'm gonna be there as well, and also on the SigStorCon.
Okay, awesome.
It's on Tuesday.
Mike, on that topic of KubeCon, I wonder if there's if we as the tooling working group can have like an agenda to try to further, some of our things within the KubeCon space in person. I'm not going to be there, but it'd be interesting.
Yeah, so well, actually, before we get into that, why don't we just so I don't know if there's anybody, my Zoom's a little weird. If there's anybody new on the call who wants to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm new on the call. This is Sandra Monroe. I'm with Anaconda. Typically, Preston sometimes shows up to the call from Anaconda, but we're both in the open source security group, so we'll be attending. And Anaconda became a sponsor, so we're also going to be attending more often.
Sure, cool, awesome, thanks. Cool. So yeah, on that front, I was also going to ask if there's any good talks that folks know that would be directly related to the efforts of SLSA in this group. I know that there's one talk, here, let me just put this. So the one that I'm participating in and Parth is, we have a Fresca talk. We're going to go into building using Fresca and then taking the output attestations from Fresca and ingesting it into stuff like Guac, which Guac is another open source tool that's intended to be sort of a graph that helps you sort of figure out like what has SLSA attestations, what claims are being made in those SLSA attestations, what identities are associated with it, and do I trust it and allow it to sort of be used by policy and that kind of thing. Does anybody else know? I know that there's a couple of, I think I saw something on the SigStor side. There's a couple of, they don't make it easy to look at the.
Yeah, Parth and me, we are doing another talk on runtime attestation at SecurityCon on Tuesday.
Cool. Feel free to just add it to the
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, to the notes there. And I was. There's also another talk coming from specifically, yeah, actually put that as well. There's going to be a talk on Guac, which is one of the tools on the ingestion side. So we're ingesting, all the SLSA attestations and then fetching additional metadata and sort of, performing analysis on it.
Hey, Mike, about that guac attestation thing. I had a chance to look at a bit of the documentation on that. How closely related to that is the supply chain maturity model being discussed over in the CDF? That one deals with attestation life cycle. It's also a Google initiative too. It deals with attestation life cycle, deployment, release management. The only thing it doesn't talk about is end of life, but it's definitely the stage after SLSA and what you do with artifact life cycle. And since this is artifact ingestion and all that when it comes to guac, I'm just curious how closely related those are, and what the discussion around that's like.
As far as I know, not at all. So from the CD Foundation stuff, we're not sure exactly. There's some stuff that they've been talking about where we're trying to kind of get a bit. If we can get enough folks on board, just from like there's just too many meetings, too few people. But if we can get more folks, we want to kind of also take a look at some of that as well. But guac right now from our end is mostly just that graph, the knowledge graph piece.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm part of those meetings. So like I caught wind and I immediately signed up and jumped on, because even in their documentation they talk about being a add-on back piece to salsa. I mean, they actually say that right in their mission and in their vision statement. So I like to think that these things could all work hand in hand. I was just curious to see what the nature of the conversation might be with guac deals with attestation and tells with that whole graph, that knowledge analysis around that whole graph knowledge analysis, and they deal with actual life cycle on the back end. So what happens with the documentation once it's obtained, and the evidence once it's obtained, and how you maintain a life cycle of that. Guac might, I think the conversation around guac leads almost into that from an ingestion standpoint, and then what you do life cycle wise after the fact.
Yeah. So from the okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So they, the meeting, I think the kickoff meeting happened last week. So the next meeting is on the 18th, right? I think a lot of people couldn't attend, and I couldn't attend myself. So I'm actually part of that group also. So I'm definitely going to bring up the whole, guac piece and see how that all integrates and how that can fit into that maturity model and everything. So I think the discussion is definitely relevant. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it is on the 18th. I'll be there as well, Park.
And I think we're also like definitely encouraging the CDF folks to also attend some of the salsa meetings as well, to make sure that we also have a lot more of that cross pollination. All right, so looking through just so this is just a cursory glance here. So I do see at SigStoreCon, there is, and I'll just copy the link into the agenda. There is Road to Salsa 4. Yeah, okay, and I'll just add the link there. I'm actually not super familiar if folks are familiar with the work that SciCode has been doing. Right. And then I think that there is for cloud native security. Oh, geez. Doesn't look like there's anything at Cloud Native Security Con. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's familiar with anything, any other sort of talks happening that are related to salsa. If not, we could also add in any talks that folks just think are going to be valuable while out there. If there's any talks that anybody who's on this call is going to be giving that they think is, just to publicize their own talk. Cool. So yeah, we can now kind of go and just say, is there if folks feel comfortable, for the people who are going to be heading out, do folks want to just include like an email that they can kind of, and we can maybe after this call, we can send out an email just to see if who wants to meet up for coffee or in between sessions and have a chat.
Sounds good.
I just kind of really quick wanted to bring up, so for the runtime attestation, so we are looking for feedback, and I can link in terms of the predicate. So we created a new predicate type for runtime. I'll link in the chat here, but so it's kind of it's more in line in terms of it's going to be more evidence for SLSA. So for example, like, you know, if SLSA is saying it needs to be a hermetic build or something, right? You can go and check the runtime attestation to see if there is any kind of, you know, TCP connects being made, all that kind of stuff, right? So evidence on top of, you know, what SLSA is providing. So you can take a look at that link I sent over. Basically, we're trying to look for feedback, and we're trying to make it very generic. For this example, we kind of use Tetragon, but we want to support the other tools. So if there's any kind of, you know, like feedback in terms of what files are missing, you know, if we should include other information, you know, like such as materials, do we need to include hashes? Like, is that too much overlapping information, or does that not fit in? So if anyone kind of wants to give feedback, that's open for discussion.
Cool, yeah, and I think actually more broadly, that's something that's been it's been brought up a couple of times, I think, in the specification meeting, just around how do we interop between different metadata, you know, sources, so that, like, hey, if there's additional information coming from the build itself, right? So from stuff like what happened in the build or whatever, is there ways we can tie that back into SLSA? Are there ways we can sort of create specifications of the individual build types? So if I have a GitHub build type, I should be expecting this, you know, these elements in the invocation or something like that. And so for this, it sounds also like, hey, while the build is running, we probably also want to capture metadata and still have it tie back to some of the stuff in SLSA. I know we could easily do that just by saying subject hashes match, and then they'll be there. But I think that there's still something probably outside the scope of this meeting, but that we should probably still chat about. Cool. All right. Here. Yeah, so to what I think it was you, Aaron, who was saying what for the folks who aren't going in person, or who, you know, even virtually watching, if there's anything that we should focus on, just for the goals of this group.
Yeah, my intention was more like, because we're trying to talk to some folks that are, you know, in different ecosystems, right? So like, I wonder if it would be good to try to identify who might be going, right, from those types of ecosystems that you guys can kind of meet in person with and advance our agenda. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know from Anaconda's perspective, we have 2 of our security engineers going. So I just pinged them to see if they want to meet up with you guys for coffee or something.
And I think I was also kind of intending more like in addition to that, you know, if we're able to meet with anyone from, you know, like NPM kind of affiliate, or even like PyPy, et cetera, like if any of those types of people were there, like that would help. It seems like what we're trying to do, of course, right? And like talk about that. Because I know, Mike, you've been kind of talking about, you know, what are they expecting? So that could be a good opportunity.
Yeah. So actually, I'll actually ask Frederick, because I mean, he's not, he's been working alongside some of the stuff with GitHub and NPM. Do you know, Frederick, do you know if there's folks who are working on NPM who are going to be at KubeCon?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, yeah, I'm sort of partly engaged in the NPM work, of course, but yeah, otherwise, I don't think there is anyone going, at least not to my knowledge.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the PyPI folks. Yeah, I'm not super familiar from any of the other folks. Brendan, do you know if anybody's from OCI is going to be there?
Yeah, there'll be a handful of people from OCI, and I think they've even got their own little mini OCI summit happening on site.
All right. Well, I might ping you later, Brendan, to see if we can, you know, even just set up a, you know, something like a 15-minute chat or something, just so we can kind of talk through what some of the challenges might be and what some of the stuff that we're trying to do with between, you know, getting ourselves ready for have the changes been released in OCI yet? It's just still a release candidate.
It's merged in main. It's a release candidate, so
Yep.
It's going to be a long while before we actually do a GA release on that. The thing we'll eventually be waiting on is to see some of the upstream registries implement and adopt it and give us a thumbs up on their side. And that it's a chicken and egg problem. They don't want to move before OCI moves, and OCI doesn't want to move before they move, and so it's just trying to get that community buy-in.
Yeah. If there's anything from our end that you think in the sort of ingesting from OCI based on the new like manifest and distribution spec changes and all that good stuff, if there's stuff that you think we can focus on, you know, definitely keep us in the loop, because that would not, I mean, I guess the idea here is that would not break like existing stuff. I don't know, is there actually a good question is there like a reference implementation of a registry in this new spec yet, or?
I think there's probably a branch under the OCI playground that we set up a while back, so there is something for distribution if people want to play around with it. And what I've seen is distribution itself is working on some of the PRs and changes on their side so that they can actually put it upstream on their repo. The other thing that might interest you is that at the little mini summit, a couple of us are talking about how can we standardize when you're shipping around things like SBOMs and attestations, all this stuff. We've got the format for saying, here's how you can package an artifact. Here's how you push it up to a registry. Here's how you associate it with an image. We want to try to document the standards around. We don't want to define the standards ourselves because it's kind of outside of our body, but we at least want to document what it should look like. Is what are the specific media types on the artifact and on the individual layers, so that if someone pushes, I'll pick an example. If someone pushed an SPDX artifact up to a registry, what's the actual artifact media type? What's the layer media type or the blob media type? so that someone else looking it up can say, okay, there is an SPDX thing I want to pull up. Let me find it. And regardless of which tool created it, which tool consumed it, they're looking at the exact same fields in the same places so they can talk to each other. So that is being discussed because there's a lot of different ways you could write it because for example, SPDX has the plus JSON on the end of their thing, but you could also say it's an application JSON as the individual blob media type. A lot of questions up in the air there where there are multiple ways you can implement it and still be perfectly valid in the spec. And it would be nice to say, here's the one way everybody should be doing it.
Yeah, that actually brings up another thing I wanted to bring up as a separate agenda item. We can put a pin in it now while we're continuing this conversation. But one thing I did want to bring up is the what tools are generating like valid salsa versus mostly valid salsa. I know we had run into this problem early on with, I think, some stuff in Tecton chains and a few others where it's like, oh, like there was, mostly a typo in a key value kind of, in a key field, or in certain cases, like certain things were, people were putting in strings when it was really an object that contained a string, like that kind of thing. And this is an ongoing problem that we've been discovering with stuff like SPDX, just SBOMs in general, is actually, as it turns out, very few people are generating actually compliant with the spec SBOMs. They're formed similarly, but they're not actually valid. And I'm curious, especially as we start to also look at ingesting that metadata coming from Salsa. If a lot of those things are not quite well formed, it's going to make ingestion really, really difficult. And so I was curious there. I think we should probably, this group should maybe do a little bit of a survey there. No, it's not a knock. I think pretty much when the original Tecton generator for Salsa came out, I think the Salsa spec hadn't fully been finished at that point, even like the V0.1. So I think there was a lot of back and forth on that front. Oops. Anybody else have any thoughts on some of that?
Would it be
Yeah,
worth
and in fact,
kind of putting together a JSON schema for in toto attestations, and then at least you'd have something you could validate against?
Yeah, so that was definitely something we've been chatting about. One of the things I've done, which for better or worse, and I have it up somewhere. I'll go and fetch it a little later. But I have a spec that I wrote in Q. Probably, obviously, don't want it in something just purely like Q. Probably wanted something a bit more widely adopted, like JSON schema. But I know some other folks have also talked about, hey, could we create like a protobuf out of it? Something that can be used in a couple of different models. But yeah, I think definitely something like a JSON schema would be valuable there. Mark, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be valuable. It's just a matter of putting the time in to do it. Like writing raw JSON schema is not pleasant. I originally looked at like, can we define the schema in some sort of language like protobuf? That would, like, that's a nicer language that can then compile to other things, and that is true. But the problem is protobuf is more restrictive than what we have in is like too opinionated. Although, you know, perhaps we want to make a change that like we should, you know, make it protobuf compatible. In particular, the issue is that we have these like opaque objects that kind of the type is defined by some other field. Protobuf has a way of doing that. It's called an any field, but it's protobuf specific. You have to include a URL to the descriptor, the proto descriptor. So I thought it was like too proto specific, especially since we're not serializing as protobuf, the wire format we're serializing as JSON. So basically I thought about that and then I just kind of gave up and worked on other things. Having a proper JSON schema or something like that, I think it would be the best thing to do.
Yeah, I just linked something that I did work on a while back. I don't think this is quite Q. I think is not quite there. I should double check to see what the level is eventually. But yeah, I do think the thing that as you sort of mentioned is sort of you kind of want to have additional restrictions on what's actually happening in there. So you want to add like constraints that is not. So I'm not a super expert in protobufs, but I know by default it's mostly just sort of types like, hey, this is a string, this is a struct of these things. But the thing that I noticed that Q allowed for, which was really nice, is you could say this is a time field, this is a string of length 5, this is a string that matches this regex and yada yada. The problem has been that certain things aren't available quite yet, like things like, hey, this should be a valid URL, and encoding that just purely in Q involves awful regular expressions, or you know, but ideally you want to be able to hook back into something like a validator in something like Go, where you could say, yep, this should be a valid date time, and then here is just a little bit of extra code that can run when you actually validate the schema that can do that. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing that Q can do is Q can, I think, I don't know if it got merged, but they have two-way syncs also with both JSON schema and I believe protobufs as well. So you can have a JSON schema become Q and Q become a JSON schema, and Q become a protobuf and import a protobuf. As well as I believe also Go structs. It can parse Go structs and generate a schema out of it. I'm on mute there. Yeah, so I'll just add a note for myself. Do we have a Mark? Do you know if we have an open issue for that already in GitHub?
We may. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah. If not, you know, I can make one after this meeting.
Yeah. The other complexity is slight complexity. Again, I think JSON schema would support all this because it's very flexible. But again, I didn't want to write it by hand. Is because like we have this I think that the main thing complexity due to like the layering concept, because we have the outer wrapper is opaque, the envelope, but then like the in toto thing just has a JSON object that could have an arbitrary schema, and so that's I think one thing. You know, it's like in two different specs. Like one is in the in toto repo, one is in ours, and so that adds a little bit of complexity. Although you could always just describe just the salsa predicate JSON schema. I don't see an issue in our repo for that.
Okay, yeah, I'll create I'll just add a note for myself in the notes there. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you about the JSON schema stuff. I know there's a couple of other libraries that can take stuff like structs from other languages or all these other things and just sort of generate JSON schemas out of them. Right. Anything anything else folks wanted to bring up? That was the main thing, was mostly the mostly around KubeCon in, oh wow, it's already the 14th, in I guess about 10 days. Cool. Any other topics, anything else folks wanted to bring up? Okie dokie. So we can end it a bit early today, and everybody's on board with us canceling next week, because I think most folks, at least half of the folks here are going to be on a flight to KubeCon. All right, cool. Well, for the folks who are going to be at KubeCon, I'm going to I'll send out a group email to the folks who put on there. If additional folks, if you're familiar with somebody who wasn't able to attend this meeting, but will be there, and you think they'll be interesting to talk to, feel free to add them to, ping me in Slack or something like that, and we'll add them to the email list. And cool. See you all in a couple of weeks, or after KubeCon. All right.
Goodbye.
Later.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.